Ladies and gentlemen.
I want to be a producer with a hit show on Broadway. I want to be a producer, lunch at Sardi's every day. I want to be a producer, sport a top hat and a cane. I want to be a producer and drive those chorus girls insane.
And the 2001 Tony Award for Best New Musical goes to... They've broken the record. The Producers.
Accepting the award for the producers Rocco Landisman and Mel Brooks.
Well, behind me, you see a phalanx, an avalanche of Jews who have come with their talent, their money, but most of all, their spirit and their love for the theater. And that's what brings us all together tonight. We all love this thing called the theater. And I'm so proud to be a part of it.
I think that sets the stage for what's going to be an exciting night. I'd like to welcome all of you to our third presentation in the 1995-96 Speaking of Success lecture series. Tonight, we have the pleasure of savoring a taste of showbiz, Rick Steiner. Tonight's introductor is Rick's close friend, Fred Mayerson. From communications, restaurants, toy products, real estate ventures, to owning minor league baseball and hockey teams, and being a co-producer of Tony Award-winning Broadway musicals, Fred is an entrepreneur extraordinaire. So, to start the show, here we go, and here's Fred.
This is a big night for me. Rick and I graduated from here, let's just say a while back. Rick is an example of someone who enjoyed high school as an adventure and began his adventure with life from here. In one pocket he had his MBA, and in the other pocket he had a deck of cards. They both served him well. He was also a 5-time world champion poker player. The most important thing about Rick is my friendship with him. I'm the luckiest guy in the world because I have a lifetime friend, and it began here, even before here. Rick has a strong mind and a strong heart and a gentle heart. He is my friend for my life, and as another friend of ours mentioned in an article recently, Rick would not only give you the shirt off his back, he would give you his back. So I love Rick very much, and you're in for a treat tonight. You're going to be entertained with By and Original. And with no further ado then, Rick, you might as well come on out and get going here.
Thank you. I've known Fred forever, and it was really nice. Okay, here we go. 87 years ago, all Gaul is divided. To be or not to be, that is the Bear Bodkin. That actually is a line from Big River. And you probably hear me say a bunch of them tonight because it's now in my vocabulary. When Debbie asked me to do this, I said, sure, why not? I didn't think the day would ever come that I'd have to think about it. And that day came, like every other homework assignment, last night. And so I went to work on this, and I started thinking about stuff. And the first thought that came to mind was something that happened a couple weeks ago. I went to see a production of The Music Man. I think I was sitting over there somewhere, and my niece Meredith Levin was in it. And I'm really glad that she had a chance to be in that show, and I think if anybody saw it, the work that Sally Little did the dedication of Tom Peters and everybody else that was associated with the production really says a lot about the tradition that obviously has been kept up here at Walnut Hills High School. The only other time I've trod the histrionic boards as a solo act up here was for an extra credit class that Mr. Knapp gave, and that was for an ancient history class. And now I'm coming back here and I realize that I am ancient history. So I thought maybe you should have a little history of what's going on and what's happened in the theater over the past 80 years or so. Broadway, at the turn of the century, was producing about 100 to 115 shows a year. And that bumped up to about 260 in the mid-1920s. Mainly plays. There were 180 plays in 1926 and 50 new musicals. And as the Depression came, the amount of shows that occurred on Broadway decreased. And it kind of followed a general skid through the war years, and then went back up in the mid-40s to about 100 shows. And then when television came on, it really sunk lower and lower, and revived with the go-go 60s. But even today, when there are only about 30 or 40 new shows a year, it's still a very, very small business. What happens is that we're much more influential than the dollars that we generate are. Now, hippity hop, what's a flop? In our language, unlike in the real world, a flop is a show that makes not $1. If you make $1, you're a hit. Now, of course, there are varying degrees of flops. They're total disasters, which I've seen a bunch of. And then up on the hit side, there are mega monster hits like Les Mis and Phantom, which I haven't experienced personally yet, but I think I will someday. Now that I've given you the brief history of the theater, why me? I think one of the reasons is that my brother Corky, who is here somewhere, he limited his acting career to Sunday mornings. Sunday morning before Sunday school, he would have this phenomenal stomachache. And it was a performance that my parents really bought. And he was very good at that, but that was pretty much how he limited his acting. But even then, he was pretty good, because back in 1901, on my mother's side, my grandfather, Harry Harris, Corky's middle name is Harry, and my middle name is Harris. My mother wanted to keep the name alive. Harry Harris was the bantamweight champion of the world in 1901. He was 5'8", weighed 116 pounds, and they called him the human hairpin. He was from Chicago originally. When he retired, he went to New York and became a box office treasure at the New Amsterdam Theater. He met an actress named Desiree Lazard, my grandmother. I think it was in my blood. My mother grew up in New York, and she had a best friend, like we all do, and his name was Frank. But Frank's last name was Lesser. And Frank Lesser went on to write Guys and Dolls, Most Happy Fella, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, which is now playing in one of our theaters in New York, but I'll get to that in a minute. And when I was 11 years old, I was a great songwriter. And my mother recognized this and sent a letter to Frank Lesser. And Frank wrote back, December 29th, 1958, Dear Ricky, I have in hand your song lyrics forwarded to me by your dear mother. And all I can say is I'd love to meet you. Next time I come to Cincy, I'll be looking you up and hope you'll have time for me between compositions. Meanwhile, tell me something. Did you also write music to go with the words? Have you any way of singing and playing the whole thing? After all, a song depends a great deal upon melody, even with such compelling lyrics. I had the blues once when I was 11, but I think in those days nobody referred to me as a cat. I think the word was gazebo. Maybe it was gazebo, I don't know. Ask your mother. Anyway, it shows how our language changes and that you are very much up to date, which is a good sign. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and your family. Well, after receiving that letter, I quit doing that stuff. I mean, what else could I do? I mean, that was the best thing that was ever going to happen to me. But I went and did summer stock at North Bend Road, and I did On Borrowed Time with Gene Lockhart in A Room Full of Roses. with Marcia Hunt. One afternoon during rehearsal, we had lunch with the leading actor, and he ordered a ham sandwich instead of a turkey sandwich because it cost 10 cents less. And I decided right then and there that I was not going to be an actor, and I pretty much stopped acting. Well, I got time off from this job to go to camp in the summertime. And I went to a camp in northern Minnesota, in Bemidji, Minnesota, called Camp Thunderbird, where I met a fellow named Rocco Landisman from St. Louis. We were probably about 13 or 14 years old. Now, Rocco's family also had a theatrical lineage. They had a theater in St. Louis called the Crystal Palace. And at the Crystal Palace, they gave a number of people their starts, among them Mike Nichols, Elaine May, Barbra Streisand, Lenny Bruce, Paul Mazursky. So Rocco had this theatrical heritage, too. We stayed friends after camp, and we became college roommates together. From our high school days onward, Rock had an incredible love of anything that Roger Miller did. We were always singing his tunes.
2 hours of pushing broom buys a 8 by 12 4-bedroom. I'm a man of means by no means, king of the road.
And one night, there was an announcement that Roger was going to play at the Lone Star Cafe in New York. And of course, Rocco, who at this point had married Heidi, was just beside himself. He was so excited. And they started to take the drive on the FDR. When Heidi said to him, "You know, Rock, wouldn't it be a great idea to put Roger Miller and Mark Twain together?"
Out all night and running wild, woman sitting home with a month-old child. Dang me, they ought to take a rope and hang me high from the highest tree. Woman, would you weep for me?
Well, I'm telling you, this guy almost drove off the FDR into the river. He was so excited. We often say it's all on account of Huck. Huck done it. None of this would have been possible without Huck. By June of '83, Rocco had commissioned Bill Hauptman to write the book from Twain's sprawling epic novel, A Huckleberry Finn. And we were far enough along at that point, Rock thought that we ought to try to close the deal with Roger. And that's really when I came on board. He said, "Rick, now's the time, get your ticket, we're ready to roll." Well, I was a Roger fan too, and I'd never met Starr before. So I did what I thought was best. I went out to Gentry Shop, and I picked up a new sport coat. And I knew all about how funny Roger was, and I found the loudest Madras sport coat that I could find. And went up to New York, and I'll never forget standing at the Parker Meridian. And Rocco's there with Heidi and Roger and Mary, and they introduced me. And Roger takes one look at me and he says, "Hi, Rick, nice to meet you. I'll be humming that sport coat in the morning." That was it. I mean, that was a kindred spirit if ever I had ever felt one in my life. And I knew it from Jump Street. And that's when I really realized that I was going to be a producer. And I knew right then and there that whatever it took to do this project, that we had no idea what we were going to do because no one had ever done it. Whatever it took, I was going to do it. It meant going through every wall.
I got back in the canoe and shoved back to the island in a hurry. Get up! Lump yourself, Jim. They're after us. We ain't got a minute to lose.
I ain't got all the provisions aboard yet.
Forget that! Just shove her out and I'll lay into that bowl, Jim.
Look out for me, oh muddy water. Your mysteries are deep and wide. And I got a need for going someplace. And I got a need to climb upon your back and ride. You can look for me when you see me coming. I may be running, I don't know. I may be tired of a running fever, but I'll be headed south to the mouth of the Ohio. So look out for me, oh muddy water. Your mysteries are deep and wide, and I got a need for going someplace. And I got a need to climb upon your back and ride. Look out for me, look out for me. Oh, muddy water, muddy water. You're Mr. Breeze, our divine wine. And I got a need for going someplace. And I got a need to climb upon your back and ride. Look out for me, oh muddy water. You're Mr. Breeze, our divine wine. And I got a need for going someplace. And I got a need to climb upon your back and ride,
And the winner is Big River.
I can't believe this.
I neglected to add, when we were talking about history, that throughout the Broadway history, the flop to hit ratio has remained roughly at 75-25. So just like baseball, if you hit 250 in this business, you're a pretty good player. 3 out of 4 times you're going to fail. I found a great way to lose weight, and that's produce your first musical, have everything riding on it. And I lost 20 pounds. It was wonderful. Anybody who wants to go on a diet, it could cost you no less than $3 million to do one of these things. And it really worked. I mean, it really, really worked. I was scared to death. I mean, we were broke. We opened the show. We were building our audience slowly. And without that Tony Award presentation, we were dead in the Mississippi. You can't go into it for the money because you just have no idea. And when we started to produce, I realized that, what it was about. I didn't realize it then, but it's about shared vision and passion and commitment and dedication. It's almost like, I don't know much about it. I never give birth to no babies, but it's kind of like birthing a baby, except the gestation period isn't 9 months. It can be years and years and years. And most of the kids come out stillborn. But if they don't, they can live on forever. And that's what I think we were after. Here ever after, we're after, here ever after. So we were after it. And we were off to the chase. We got out of the Park of Meridian. We decided to go to dinner. And Rocco had this small VW. But Roger and I and Mary were scrunched in the back of this little car. And remember, I had just been to Gentry shop, saved about half. And I looked into my sport coat pocket, and there was the price tag. Roger grabbed the damn thing, slapped it on his forehead and said, "Rick, I got to get out of town. There's a price on my head." Well, that was Roger. And how could you not love a guy like this and go do anything that it took to do what it took to do? So for the next few months, Roger committed to the project all right, but then getting him to write the stuff was just a little bit tougher. He didn't read or write music. He just hummed it, and he just thought on it. And he was very slow. But luckily, he'd be playing gigs in my favorite town, Las Vegas, while I'd be playing in poker tournaments. And we'd meet, and I'd give him cheers and tell him he could do it, because all of these guys have this, they're very insecure, and you really have to tell them that they can do the job. But it took him a long, long time. He'd say things like, "I got a handle on a song." And he'd be like living the song. I'm not sure he ever really read Huckleberry Finn. If I had to bet, and I'm not much of a betting guy, he didn't read it. There's no way. Rocco would give him a scene, say, here's the scene, and we need a song. And Roger would say, I'm on the banks of the Mississippi. And he'd kind of get into the feeling of what it was just by the description that Rock gave him. And out of that came songs like River in the Rain and Muddy Water. Of course, Roger was Roger, and sometimes he misunderstood what we wanted him to do. There's a line in the show that Pap, Finn, and Huck, and Pap is a drunk. He a drunk, and he wants to convince people that he's changed his life. And he says, "Upriver, I met a man who showed me I'd been a fool and fooled away my life. Here's the hand that was the hand of a hog, but it ain't no more. It's a clean hand now, so take hold of it, shake it, and don't be afraid, because I tell you, I'm a new man." Well, Roger took the song, and what we wanted was a clean hand and a hand that was the hand of a hog, and Roger wrote a song, and he entitled it "Hand for the Hog." He said, it went something like this: "Well, I often heard, but I ain't too sure that man's best friend is a mangy cur. I kind of favor the hog myself. How about a hand for the hog? Say, hog ain't nothing but a porky thing, little forked feet with a nosy ring. Pickle them feet, folks. How about a hand for the hog? If you took a notion, I bet, good hog would make a hell of a pet. You could teach him to ride and to hunt. You'd clean him up and let him sit up front. Well, the way I see it looks like this. Either you ain't or either you is a true blue lover of the swine, folks. How about a hand for the hog?" Thank you. So he wrote this song, and it had nothing to do with the show. But it was wonderful. It was a signature song of Roger Miller.
I remember asking Roger how a country songwriter got involved with a Broadway musical. And he told me he never even read Huckleberry Finn, but Rocco made him an offer he couldn't understand. I'll always be grateful to Roger for his humor, his talent, for making sure I got back to Broadway one more time, and for giving my character Pap a very funny, very angry song to sing called Government. Later on in the run, when I had to leave for other commitments, Roger himself took over the role of Pap.
"Well, your dadgum government's your sorry so-and-sos. You got your damn hands in every pocket of my clothes. Well, your dadgum.
In 1985, Big River won 7 Tony Awards, including one to Roger Miller for Best Score. Roger, you were always the best on all scores.
And I think for me, one of the great thrills of producing is watching this whole creative process of creation, because it happens in so many different ways. You can't put your finger on it. It's not a science. A lot of times it doesn't work, but when it does, theater is what it really is, and that's magic. And that's what you're always looking for. And Into the Woods was certainly magic, and for us in more than one way. And it was magic because it was at that point, before we opened, that Jim Binger saw how great rock was and appointed him president of Jamson Theaters. And since that point, Broadway really hasn't been the same. The Schuberts are run by 2 guys that are in their mid-70s, and all the creative and innovative juices of Broadway have flowed to this small chain of 5 theaters. I don't think Big River would have ever happened if it hadn't been for the fantastic friends that I have in Cincinnati. And Fred, without your guidance and your financial support and your family's financial support, and Corky, all of our families doing it, and all my friends that had chipped in to do a project by a bunch of unknowns, it really would have never happened. So I feel very proud that for the last 12 years, in a great part, a lot of what's happened on Broadway has happened because of people from this great town of Cincinnati. And we did The Secret Garden, and that pretty much was a show I'd never heard of. It was a book, evidently, and well, I didn't know, and I never knew any guys who knew, but all I knew was that there were these scads of women, all in their mid-40s, that would come up to Marcia Norman and say, "Oh, it was my favorite book as a child." I mean, if we got that once, we got it 1,000 times, and I began to believe some people really knew about this show. And I did it as a team player. It was fun, again, to watch Mandy Patinkin at work, and Marcia Norman got a Tony. It was the first all-female creative team ever to be on Broadway, and Heidi headed it up. She was head producer, and that was a great moment for her. And we lost out to a TNA show called Will Rogers Follies because it was the the Gulf War, and it was a very jingoistic period in our history, and we thought we were going to win, and all that luck we had in '85 came back to haunt us. So we lost that one, and that was that for that show. That brings us to Smokey Joe's Cafe. Let me just tell you about Smokey Joe's, because ever since the 4th grade, rock and roll has been my life. The first 45 I ever bought was Hound Dog. I never knew Lieber and Stoller had first names, because always on the back of the records it would say Lieber Stoller. And I knew their music as well as anybody. And first problem we had was the name. We called it everything from Some Cats Know, and we figured that people would abbreviate it to cats, so we didn't do that one. We called it Baby That's Rock and Roll when we opened up in Chicago. We then switched it to D.W. Washburn's All Singin', All Dancin', Black and White Jive Ass Rock and Roll Review. Didn't seem to hit the right chord. And we went through 3 directors until we found, went right back home, and there was Jerry Zaks sitting in his office. And he came out to Chicago. The show was in a lot of trouble at that point. We fired Otis Salid, who was our director, and we brought in a doctor. We brought in an ER, and the ER was Susan Schulman, who had directed The Secret Garden. And Susan was phenomenal. She took a shapeless show and made it into something that was really great in 3 works. She did mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on it and got us out of the recovery room and had a show for us. And we went to LA with it, and that's when Jerry Zaks came on board. And at that point, I knew that this was going to be a great show, because Zaks had this tremendous sensibility of what's right. He knew how to do it. He was a child of the 50s. He used to play guitar in his basement. It was perfect. And for this show, didn't matter about the Tonys. We weren't going to get any Tonys. They weren't going to like us on Broadway, but we didn't care. It was rock and roll is here to stay. It will never die. And I knew that, and I think we all knew that. And so that's how we got to do Smokey Joe's Cafe, and I think I'd like to show a little segment from it right now. That's the house, the Virginia Theater, where we're playing in New York.
Say the neon lights are bright on Broadway. They say there's always magic in the air on Broadway. But when you're walking down the street and you ain't had enough to eat, the glitter rubs right off and you're nowhere. On Broadway, they say that there's something else on Broadway. On Broadway, but looking at them just gives me the blues. On Broadway, but how you gonna make time when all you got is one dime? Something down won't even shine in your shoes. On Broadway.
Ladies and gentlemen, live from the Minskoff Theater on Broadway, the League of American Theaters and Producers and the American Theater Wing present the 1995 Tony Awards.
Well, we promised you a show, and you got a show. I'd like to thank Rick on behalf of Wanted Hills for sharing with us the behind the scenes of showbiz. Thanks so much.